The most important thing when making a game is of course the actual content. The gameplay, the story, the audio, and the graphics. But if you don't know how to present these things in a way that is interesting to the player, you might find that they lose interest, no matter how cool your game is. And a key element when it comes to keeping players hooked is pacing. So in this video we'll explore how you can use pacing to keep your players engaged. But first, this video is sponsored by Dennis Panjuda. Dennis is an awesome game dev tutor who's just updated his super successful Complete C# masterclass. This class will make you feel super comfortable writing code in C# and using it for programming your own games in Unity. It will give you knowledge on many different aspects of C# and teach topics such as databases, LINQ and WPF, and much more. At the end of the course, you will even have made 3 games on your own. If this sounds like something you're interested in, simply click the link in the description to get started and get a massive discount. So there are basically 2 parts to pacing in video games. One is the typical narrative tension curve of the plot, or how the story evolves throughout the game. The other is the rhythm of the gameplay, or how shifts in tempo and intensity affect the experience. In terms of narrative, many of the best stories can be plotted into graphs similar to this one, with a steady rise in tension. Setup, confrontation, and then resolution. An introduction to the world and the main characters, followed by an establishment of the conflict, leading to a climax resolving that conflict. But it's actually not usually this simple. Instead of a constantly rising linear graph, it's more like a fluctuating line with its own smaller tension curves along the surface. The overall tension is still increasing up until the resolution, but a great story has sub-conflicts to resolve along the way. Imagine if Frodo just wandered into Mordor and threw the ring into the fiery depths of Mount Doom without any obstacles along his way. Pretty boring. But when it comes to story, games usually have more in common with a TV series or a book. Just like games, both of these media are constructed to keep the consumer engaged for as long as possible, and not necessarily in one sitting. Unless of course you binge watch an entire season of Game of Thrones in 2 days. Not that I've ever done that. Anyway, many TV shows build their episodes around a template that looks like this. They build tension and then totally ruin it all with commercial breaks. However, after the break, we're still there. The reason for this is the constant use of cliffhangers, which is a concept that works just as well when applied to game design. I'm not saying that this is always the best way to create a great tension curve. Cliffhangers can work, but if they're overused, they're bound to get predictive and annoying. With delicate use, however, small intensity spikes in the narrative can be very effective at keeping the player engaged throughout the course of your game. If used well, it'll spice up the overall experience without getting obnoxious, so definitely keep this in mind. But narrative is one thing. What about gameplay? Well, when pacing your gameplay, a very important factor is rhythm. Rhythm refers to the balance between various gameplay types. For example, a game might have slower tempo sections like puzzles, dialogue, or exploration, which make a nice contrast to higher tempo sections such as combat and racing. It's important to alternate between different kinds of gameplay, because playing through long stretches of slow gameplay becomes boring, while getting challenged at high intensity for a long time becomes exhausting. Of course, one of the tools at your disposal in terms of balancing more or less intense gameplay is difficulty. In fact, we just made a separate video on difficulty in video games, so check that out in case you haven't seen it. Now, Half-Life 2 for example, and Valve games in general are great at controlling the rhythm throughout the game. Intense combat gameplay is often followed by calmer exploration or puzzle elements, never sticking to the same type of gameplay for too long. For example, in Chapter 3 of Half-Life 2, Gordon, the main character, obtains his first weapon and really puts it to use as he fights through the canals. In this fairly combat-heavy section, the player's fighting skills are put to the test for the first time. Gordon walks through thin and claustrophobic corridors with combines, man-hacks, zombies and aliens lurking around every corner, which makes the whole section quite tense. The next part, though, is a slow-paced roaming and exploration section, with occasional puzzles. The world is no longer a bunch of claustrophobic corridors, but instead a big open area. And all you have to do is just cruise in your airboat and take in the view. This is a huge contrast from before, both in terms of pacing and scenery, which serves as a great breathing room before the action rises once again. So the Half-Life franchise really nails tension and release, which is why their games are often very hard to put down. But pacing, narrative, and gameplay aren't the only things that go into keeping players engaged. Just as important is creating a sense of progression. Progression is strongly related to what is referred to as the reward schedule. In other words, we want to think about how and when we reward the player to give them a sense of achievement and make them feel they've really earned the progression they've made. Keep in mind that rewards in this sense doesn't just mean big loot drops or new abilities. A reward could also be a progression in the story or getting to visit a new level. And here, timing is key.
Keep breathing. That's the key.
Giving too few rewards or spacing them out too much can demoralize the player, and they may start to feel like they aren't progressing. On the other hand, giving the player too many rewards or rewarding trivial tasks will lessen the impact of each and diminish the sense of achievement. Striking the perfect balance in the reward schedule is not easy, and in the end it's all about psychology and how the brain gets affected when playing the game. I think we've all had experience with games, particularly in the casual mobile market, that are designed primarily to be addictive without much thought to the content of the game itself. These games might be extremely good at keeping players hooked, but I think it's a shame that many developers are stuck trying to optimize retention instead of getting to utilize their skills to create meaningful experiences. That said, thinking about how you pace your rewards is important for almost any game. And you should also think about not holding back on rewards that are important to the way your game plays. Again, Half-Life 2 is a great example. Valve initially planned the gravity gun to be used only in the last sections of the game, but found that players had so much fun with the mechanic that they decided to give the gun to players much earlier, even though it meant they had to go back and restructure a bunch of their levels. Now, another great way of keeping players engaged is with anticipation. This means presenting the player with something that they are unable to obtain yet. This can go hand in hand with rewards. Say if you disclose to the player that at a certain amount of XP something cool will be unlocked. This happens every time you glance at the skill list in RPG games such as Horizon Zero Dawn, or when you start thinking up the perfect combination of skills and items in games like Path of Exile. Fantasizing about rewards long before they are available essentially prolongs the time in which the player is enjoying them. And it also gives the player achievable goals, which can offer incentive to keep playing. I've spent countless hours in Excel or external build and planning tools thinking up the most crazy builds for characters in games. A Templar that ignites himself in order to damage enemies around him in Path of Exile, or an agent that specializes in tech to heal his allies in The Division 2. Games like these have been on my mind for hours even while not playing. Of course, creating custom builds like this might be a bit too daunting or nerdy for most players. But giving the players some sort of endgame goal is always a great motivator. Now, sometimes anticipation can be set up more like a mystery, something that intrigues the player but without them knowing exactly what is to come. I think a good example of this is the Dark Portal in World of Warcraft. Here players are limited to explore the main world of Azeroth for almost 60 levels. During this entire time, every time they open their map, they can see another world called Outland. But the actual contents of the world is grayed out. Only when they reach level 58 do players get to enter the Dark Portal, and they are immediately transported to a huge new area that they get to explore. In fact, Blizzard uses this extensively in World of Warcraft, and the same applies to each of their higher level zones. The trick to making this work is setting up a scenario that seems intriguing. The curiosity drives the player to keep playing, because they just have to discover something new and unravel the mystery.
Well, you found me. Congratulations. Was it worth it?
Of course, a huge Dark Portal definitely helps with this. And we actually see this a lot in the LEGO games as well. During the main campaign of LEGO Star Wars, for example, you'll encounter areas that you cannot yet reach. However, later in the game you unlock new characters that have the ability to open specific doors or jump higher in order to reach those areas that were previously unavailable. But some games handle engagement and anticipation in a completely different way. In Minecraft, there's no specified endgame goal. Or there wasn't before the Ender Dragon was introduced. But Minecraft was compelling long before this, and still is today. In fact, many people still haven't completed the game, and they don't really care too much about finishing. So what makes Minecraft so engaging to just play? Well, you might think that a game like Minecraft has no real progression, and therefore no opportunity for the developer to control the pacing. But Notch, the creator of Minecraft, has crafted a world where the player is free to fabricate their own story and their own progression. Many players' first goal is to survive the night, but from here, this sky's the limit. Some players' goal might be to build a beautiful house, while others choose to spend time creating the most optimal system to craft and handle resources. And if they get bored of the current gameplay loop, the player can just change up the gameplay themselves. Had enough of mining, let's go hunting for some food. So the structure and presentation of a game is just as important as the content itself. Turns out, they go hand in hand. You can create a game with great combat, mind-boggling puzzles and snappy controls, and it will feel great for a while. But with poor structure and presentation, it will never really shine. So hopefully this video has given you some good ideas on how to pace narrative and gameplay in a way that is interesting to the player. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Also make sure to check out the complete C# masterclass by clicking the link in the description. And this is the second video on game design we've done recently. We are really enjoying making these since the world of game design is something that we've let undiscovered for a long time. So if you want to see more videos on game design, or if you have a particular topic in mind, definitely let us know in the comments. On that, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in March, and a special thanks to Ville Vertanen, Lost to Violence Love Forever, Fraser Marify, Leo Lisette, Nobby Ninja, Jim Schubert Jazz, Daniel Dusanik, Dan DeSam, Jacob Sanford, Marc-Antoine Girard, Naoki Wasaki, Gregory Pierce, Michael Korobov, The Mighty Zeus, Owen Cooper, Elson the Fierce, Erasmus, Yijit Kaya, Ismail Lukusa, and Sirius Wolf. You guys rock!